Family and friends, we are here today to honor the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Although he is no longer here with us, his spirit will always be present. Today is a day of great sadness and of loss. Today is also a day for remembering and celebrating all that Dr. Martin Luther King has accomplished, all that he's done, and all that he's changed. Throughout this eulogy, I'm going to speak not of sadness, but of great success. Although Martin Luther King Jr. had somewhat of a rough life, he turned his struggles into accomplishments. One of his most greatest accomplishments was his most famous speech, I Have a Dream speech, which changed history. Becoming a social activist, Martin Luther King Jr. also changed history through his most famous achievements. But first, we must honor the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his life story in order to fully appreciate his achievements. Michael Luther King Jr., later on known as Martin Luther King Jr., was born in Georgia on January 15, 1929. He was one of 3 children that grew up in a loving and secure home. Martin Luther King Jr.'s struggles early on in life were not only his own, but were his family's as well as those in the community that were African American. Growing up, Martin's mother and father both tried to shield him from racism, segregation, and discrimination, but they could only protect him for so long and from so much. Upon entering school and even out in the community, Martin Luther King Jr. experienced extreme racism. White people would yell racial slurs at him. He would even have to stand at the back of the buses. White people would throw things at him, threaten him, and he couldn't enter certain stores because of his color. When Martin Luther King Jr. entered school, he quickly found out that whites and blacks were treated differently. Bathrooms, drinking fountains, and classrooms were all segregated. Even the quality of learning that each race received was different. But this didn't stop him. He was an excellent student, skipping both 9th and 11th grade and eventually going off to college. Growing up, Martin Luther King Jr. also experienced some losses that were really hard for him. When he was only 12, his grandmother unexpectedly passed away. More so than anybody else, Martin took this extremely hard and was traumatized for a long period of his life. Martin Luther King Jr. also experienced the loss of his father-in-law, who was a pastor. Being the person he was, Martin stepped up to the plate and took over the church, becoming a pastor as well. Although these struggles would have seemed to stop Martin Luther King Jr., he learned to grow from them. This in turn shaped him into the successful person he would become later on in life. Because of Martin Luther King Jr.'s father, he learned to have a passion for every social class, no matter their race. He believed that everyone should be treated equally and that everyone should have the same opportunities. Because of his passion and his beliefs, Martin Luther King Jr. became a social activist for African Americans, but for him, becoming a social activist was only the beginning. Throughout his life, Martin Luther King Jr. achieved many important and significant historical events, one of the most important being the March on Washington in 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. helped lead over 200,000 people to the Lincoln Memorial overlooking the Washington Monument. The march was organized by King and groups of civil rights, labor, and religious organizations in order to gain civil and economic equality for African Americans. The march was crucial in helping to pass the Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination based on race, religion, color, sex, or national origin. Another important and historical event that was led by Martin Luther King Jr. was the Montgomery bus boycott. On the same day that Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on the bus to a white person, King led the boycott at Montgomery, Alabama bus station. The boycott, which lasted over a year, was a political and social protest against racial segregation. It eventually led to the Supreme Court ruling that dubbed segregated buses unconstitutional. King was arrested for leading the protest and underwent abuse and multiple threats, and his home was even bombed. But his determination for justice and equality for African Americans never stopped him in his fight. Not only did Martin Luther King Jr. achieve such significant accomplishments, but he also delivered several moving speeches. Because of his love for equality and his passion for civil rights, Martin Luther King Jr. expanded his achievements to both movements and speeches in order to be heard. During his lifetime, Martin Luther King Jr. was responsible for multiple speeches that have changed history. One of his most moving speeches and most memorable speeches was his I Have a Dream speech, which he delivered during the March on Washington. Martin Luther King Jr. was there to let the nation know that blacks will no longer put up with segregation, crimes because of their skin color, injustice, and discrimination. Blacks and whites have the same equality, and this wasn't